Buonasera, benvenuti a GiovedìScienza. L'argomento è molto interessante.
Welcome to GiovedìScienza, Science on a Thursday. The topic is very interesting because it concerns our pockets and also two very important topics, that is to say, the higher costs for both electricity and gas and the introduction of this legislation on carrier bags that are partly compostable. We'll see why I say saying partly, but will be a small cost, compared to the increase in energy costs, but which we consider previously included in the price of the goods, while this has become clear not only at the supermarket. For instance, I went to the chemist recently and I was given this bag here, and I don't know if it is compostable, organic. We'll see to what extent it is. And I was given two different receipts, one for the drug and one for the bag, 0.2 cents. No, 2 cents. So you get a separate one, so it's true for chemists, but in fact, all the shops have to do it. This is a 2-cent bag. There are 3-cent bag, 4, 5 cents ones. Someone charges only 1 cent. It depends how much they intend to recharge. So we thought we would talk about this. There's going to be a 5% increase for electricity and for gas. This evening, we have two guests that Alberto Agliotti will be introducing.
Vincenzo Fracastoro.
Gian Vincenzo Fracastoro is an engineer, coordinator of the energy engineering course in Turin, where he also teaches and where he holds courses on environmental comfort and energy saving, and this has a lot to do with what we will be talking about this evening. And then we have Stefano Bertacchi, who is a doctoral student in industrial biotechnology. He comes from the Milano-Bicocca University, and he's an expert in bioplastics, or I'm going to read it here. He studies the genetic modification of microorganisms for the production of complex molecules, in this case bioplastics. And with him we will be talking about the plastic. He's not only a doctoral student or researcher, but he is also a popularizer, science popularizer. He has also written a book, which by pure chance we have here with us, which is called Genetically Modified, the Journey in the World of Biotechnologies. Here it is, published by Herpley. It's a very nice series. There are many volumes which are not too long but very dense of information. You can purchase the book at the entrance of the theatre if you so wish.
Anche Gian Vincenzo Fracastoro.
Gian Vincenzo Fracastoro has also written a few texts, but you will find all the information on the leaflet you were given. I am going to be leaving my chair on this side, that side, this side, to our two gong players, as you know, those of you who've already been attending the previous meetings in this season, that we invite two people from the audience, possibly students, or not necessarily. They come on the stage and they will be doing it here. Let's welcome them with a round of applause. Let's give them a mic so they can introduce themselves. My name is Luca, and I am studying at the Copernico High School.
Tommaso, sempre studente del
Tommaso, same school. Are you in the same class? Yes, we are. So Tommaso and Luca, they can interrupt once each at any time our speakers. And to do that, they have this wonderful musical, precious instrument. You never know, it might fall. So don't use too much strength. This morning it happened because Piero was a bit over enthusiastic. Let's have a test. When you think, if and when you think it's appropriate, sound the gong.
Ho esagerato a chiedere cautela. No, un po' più.
I say, you were overcautious, a bit stronger. Yes.
Quindi direi che si sente.
I think you can hear it.
Abbiamo preparato anche i nostri ospiti che non saranno.
So we've prepared our guests who will not be too frightened. Second test, but don't use the mic.
Perfetto. Direi che funziona.
I think it works. And now, since I was a chair bearer, here the other chair is. Let me give the floor now to Professor Fracastoro.
Fracastoro. Buonasera a tutti. Grazie per la presentazione, grazie per l'invito.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I hope that this evening will be interesting for you too. The first topic is the price of our bills. I've prepared a few slides to describe what is happening in Italy, because sometimes a graph will illustrate much better what is happening. This is a slide which you can easily find online if you look under the Energy Authority's website, which is now called RIRA in Italy. In this case, it gives you an example of the cost of incense by cubic meter that a user using 1,400 cubic meters of natural gas or methane gas per year. As you will observe, over the past 5 years, because we're starting from the fourth quarter of 213, well, so here you see there's not quite 4 years. Here we start from 86 cents per cubic meter with a progressive decline reaching in the second quarter of 2016 69 cents. From 86 to 69, that's quite a reduction. Then it's a bit zigzagging, but the forecast for the first quarter of 2018 is that there will be quite a marked growth. The third quarter, it has been increasing, now reaching 76 cents. That is to say, a value which corresponds to the first quarter of 2016. What we can say is that in the course of these past few years, there hasn't really been an increase but a decrease, but that now we are regaining previous levels. I would also like to show you where Italy stands. If we look at the price of natural gas in Europe, you will observe that Italy has been circled in red. It is one of the highest ones, much higher than everybody else is Sweden, 0.12 euros per kilowatt hour, and you mustn't be scandalized if we compare cubic meters and kilowatts per hours, because 1 cubic meter, it is equivalent to 10 kilowatts per hour. So Sweden is talking, in Sweden we're talking about 1.20 euros per cubic meter, and this was the first semester of 2017. It was round about 70 cents. You see there are 3 colors: the price of the material, and then the price of VAT and value-added tax, and of tax. As you will observe, tax is quite hefty. Another thing which is rather surprising, there's an enormous difference between the cost of natural gas in the Ukraine, 20 cents, and the one in Sweden, which is the most expensive, or ours, which is around 75 cents. So the price of natural gas, these are always prices that can be compared. The price of electricity has a trend which is not quite as marked. In the same period, and we're talking about the energy authority supplying, we go from 19 cents per kilowatt hour to about 20.63 of the first quarter of 2018. Which means that there is quite a small difference, small variation over the past 5 years. But if we go and compare it with the price of the period when it was cheapest, that is to say the second quarter of 2016, when it was 17.91 cents, from 17.90 to 20-something, it's quite a strong increase. Interestingly here, there are different colors which correspond to the different prices. In the case of electricity, please excuse me if I'm going to detail this, it's particularly important because the cost of the energy in itself is the one which you can see in blue down below, like natural gas. Then there's not only tax, there's also the cost for the meter and the transport of electricity in green, and then in lilac there are what are called the system fees, and then there in red we have tax. Now, if we were to compare these, if we were to compare this and see what it means, what transport, well, it's quite clear. If you're going to carry electricity from the power stations or from the small photovoltaic systems which Italy has right up to the doorstep, is expensive. And there's also losses because as the electricity is carried, you lose some of it. And then you also understand what a meter means. They put you don't pay for the meter, but somebody has to pay for it. But what are these system fees? Well, that's not quite as clear. Most of that, which, as you can see, account for about 4 cents per kilowatt per hour, is nearly all due to the support to renewable energies. Now, this is something we all know. The incentives for the installation and production of photovoltaic systems are paid by the use themselves. The state didn't pay anything for it. So this has meant that costs have gone up. I teach renewable energy, as Aliotti said, so I'm above any biased against it. I think that photovoltaic is one of the most beautiful and technologies there is that has come on in leaps and bounds. But we shouldn't forget that it has cost us quite a bit. And these 3 cents and a half, roughly, plus the 4 that you saw earlier on that we pay for, don't seem a lot on the 20 cents, but think that it is in fact roughly the equivalent of the cost of some European countries, the kilowatt per hour. The incentive for the renewable energy costs as much as the energy in some countries. In some way, there are no more incentives now, but we paid for the cost of the development of photovoltaic, and this has led to the decrease in the cost of photovoltaic, following which the role of incentives petered out, and as a result, since there are no more incentives, in Germany there still are some, but there virtually aren't any in most countries. So to a degree we have sacrificed ourselves for the good of humanity, because had it not been for the the 11 gigawatts that were installed in Italy in 2011, there would not have been a fall in price, which was due to the fact that production moved to China, where energy costs very little and labor even less. If now we go back to our bills, because we focused for a moment on the support of renewable energies, but if we go back to the overall price, why has the price of natural gas increased or of electricity? Well, for natural gas, you might say the cost of extraction has increased, or it might be more difficult to reach it, but electricity, well, to understand how things go, you must understand what electricity is made of. It's very interesting to see the breakdown of a bill, and you can see it on the website. We haven't got time now, but here I wanted to compare it. Italy is sort of in the middle as far as the cubic meter of natural gas is concerned, and it is one of the middling countries also in electricity. I can't really see, but there's only Ireland, Germany, and Denmark that are more expensive than us, with the 30 cents per kilowatt hour. But Denmark is the richest country in Europe, and this is a domestic residential use, and so with 3 kilowatts. It's an average, again, of residential power. These are not so expensive. Once again, the difference between Bulgaria, that is the cheapest, and Denmark, that is the most expensive, you can see it. Here, the comparison is the cost of keeping a light bulb on for a year, 5 hours a day, and you see that you go from about €5 a year, I can't really read it, to something just below 2. So electricity prices too are very different if you compare countries. We will be coming back to this later on, but let us see the breakdown of the Italian energy supply, and in particular the price of natural gas, that's methane. Here you can see it's been stable for many years, since 2015 to 2016, and then suddenly it is increasing. You have to follow the green line, which represents the transfer, the virtual transfer or exchange point. Recently there's been a slight increase, but all of it is in fact linked to the trend in oil prices. This is West Texas Intermediate, and you can see that following a drop which for a few seconds or a few days took it below $30 a barrel. Here you can see around about 35 in 2008. Prices have started to slightly increase, and now it's around $64, $65 per barrel. You can also see it for Brent. The price for Brent is $69 per barrel. There's quite a substantial increase. There has been in the latter part of the year, and this is what probably led to the increase of the raw materials price in producing electricity, which is linked to the price of oil, or in our country in particular for natural gas. I'm going to interrupt even without a gong. Could you tell us what the difference is between Texas and Brent? Brent is the one which we refer to in Europe, because it's the North Sea oil. Once it was British, then Norwegian British. Now it's a mix between the prices of oil in the various North Sea oils, while the West Texas Intermediate is the reference price for the US. And this year, what has the increase been due to? Well, it was determined by the OPEC's decision. You know that the OPEC is the organization of oil exporters to reduce the daily production by 1.8 million barrels. 1.8 million barrels. This in the attempt to get the price to go back up, because it had really been so low that it was creating a problem of economic crisis, which, for example, hit Venezuela. And certainly the people in that country were suffering, and that is also true for Russia, the greatest world producers, 10 million barrels a day, followed by Saudi Arabia, 9.5, and this has led to an unbalance in the trade balance, not for the Arabs really, because it's so much, and the production is so much, and there's so few that you may go from 50 to 40 or 60, but it doesn't really matter. So these are the reasons, and this is the first thing I wanted to say, following which I'm going to stop, and I hope that there will be questions, maybe to go back onto some of the things which I skipped. I would also like to have a question. We know that the US have started to, well, this is quite a few years ago, have started using shale gas. That is to say, which they use with fracking, the fracturing of the underground, and they extract oil, which up to a few years ago was considered, and gas, yes, oil and gas. Now, this availability has brought the US to becoming self-sufficient, right? Yes, correct. Now, the fact that there is this how has this affected the price of natural gas? Why have we not felt of the impact of this in the world market? We've had gas from fracking that was not there, but well, in fact, the price of natural gas fell around about 2014-15. It just because of shale gas. The second thing, we have not clearly analyzed the various ingredients or components, but is it right that the cost for distribution of electricity is so expensive? Well, it's a system problem. Certainly the management of the Italian system has become increasingly complex because the massive introduction of renewable energy, which for 2014 has led to 43% of renewable sources in the production of electricity, is, as you can well understand, is something which we're very happy and proud of. It's also not so well known, is it? Unfortunately, in the two following years, this percentage dropped. We're now on 37%. Not because the photovoltaic, the solar panels didn't work, but simply because there was a more limited hydroelectric production, because that is still the main renewable Italian source, and the fact that there was less rainfall has meant that there was a loss of 15% of the hydroelectric production. It's 15% of 15%, because I think it's all 15%, isn't it, the hydroelectric? Well, it's half of all the renewables, so it's about 22, about 14-15%. Yes, it's half of that 43%, so 22%, which is hydroelectric. And when you have to do with renewable sources, we're in the hands of the gods, because if there's no sun, if there's no wind, or if there's a solar eclipse, which happened a few years ago, no energy. And this is the beauty of renewable sources. Well, but the eclipse lasts 2 minutes, yes, but they had to download all the major implants, because otherwise the system would have gone completely mad. So there are, in the costs of the system, there's transport, but there's also the management of the meter and so on. The electronic, for example. This is a second generation of meters. My question was a bit biased because since I have a very small holiday home at the sea, and that's listed as a second home, so it's costs much more in terms of energy. And since I can never go there, so I was never able to go there last year at all. I pay 47 euros, which says that the energy costs 0. All the rest of it, yes. I go a little slightly more often, at least in the summer, but yes, these bills are ridiculous, because if you divide the number of kilowatt per hour, you have an infinite price in your case, because it's 0, but about 4 or 5 euros. I would like to make a small remark. You were saying that you have the technologically most advanced meters. This means that they can read consumption in real time and communicate it directly to who? Well, to the distributor or to the company, but not necessarily, I've been told, to the company which we have purchased electricity from. So sometimes this is the explanation that I was given. Today we still find in the presumed or expected consumption. So if the electricity supplier does not all coincide always with the company that issues the bill, so there's no real-time communication. Yes, this might be one of the poison fruits of the unbundling, that is to say, the division. From here to there, you belong to one company, from there to another, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to say something. As far as energy is, I am in favor of monopolies. Me too. So that's 2 of us at least. And because I really don't want people calling me all the time suggesting that I should change. I realize that the people who phone are doing it because it's their job.
Un po' timido. Facciamo finta di non averlo sentito. Però l'abbiamo sentito, dai.
Volevo chiedere, ma quante ditte che forniscono?
I would like to ask you, how many companies, how many electricity suppliers are there in Italy? I don't know. Can't answer that. But lots and lots and lots. Hundreds of them.
Allora, passiamo al dottor Bertacchi.
And now we're going to move on to Dr. Bertacchi and carrier bags. Let's try and understand whether they're really compostable, biodegradable, or whether they're not, how much they cost, and if they're good or bad in terms of the environment. First of all, let's see the connection between the 2 topics that we're talking about today is that of renewable. That is to say, what have they got to do with renewable energy? This is because normally plastic, the one that we're used to, is normally from oil. That is to say, there's a refinery that takes crude oil and transforms it in lots of consumer goods, such as plastics, and does so in an extraordinary manner, because you can obtain very many things from petrol gasoline and all those things, and it's changed the way in which we light. But we know that this is particularly polluting for a number of problems. So what we're trying to do is that we're trying to shift from a refinery to a biorefinery that no longer uses oil, but biomasses. What are biomasses? We can say in the whole, for example, that they're plant components. So what is the difference between one and the other? That biomasses are renewable. If you think of a plant, the plant grows quite quickly with chlorophyll and photosynthesis, while oil is natural. Yes, it is, and in theory renewable, but not in time, which is compatible for us because we can't wait for the millions of years for it to become oil. So we don't know exactly how much oil we have, possibly more than what we thought, but it might be complicated in extracting it. While biorefineries, we can obtain various types of products. And this is basically what industrial technologies, the industrial technologies I study do. Who are the main actors of biorefineries? Well, microorganisms. Microorganisms that are able to transform renewable biomasses into products. Here are examples so that we know very easily. For example, lactobacilli that transform with lactic fermentation, transform milk into yogurt, and lactic acid is a molecule that we will be finding in later because it's one of the building blocks to the production of a biodegradable or compostable bioplastic. Or, for example, yeast of bread and beer that takes the sugars of malt or of grapes to produce alcohol, in this case ethanol. So naturally there is a source, the raw material which enters, and one which is a finished product. And there may be various finished products, some which are completely finished and others which we can use with additional engineering. This is why we call these cell factories. That is to say that they are real factories. Let me go on. Bioplastics are one of the examples of what we can obtain with the use of renewable biomasses. Bioplastics are plastic. What is a plastic? What is plastic? It's a material which maintains a deliberate shape in time. There are two types: the thermoplastics, which is what we call the common plastics. So that is to say, they have various features. They may be various building blocks because there are polymers. They're like a long train with lots of wagons, and each wagon is what is a monomer, and they can all be the same, and then they're called homopolymers, or they may have different ones. There'll be copolymers, and that will affect the chemical and physical properties, or they can be a blend of different polymers. So here we have different traditional ones, and you see that it's indicated with a class or range that goes from 1 to 7. PET is 1, which is the one used for bottles, like those tiny ones you can see here. And in the packaging is one of the most common ones. Then we have PVC, propylene, polystyrene, and so on and so forth. And then we have number 7, which is others, where we also have bioplastics and compostable bioplastics, but not all of them are. And here again, there's a bit of confusion. Why? Well, because you can identify here this chart where, on the one hand, we have the raw material, that is to say, oil or biomasses, and on the other hand, whether it is compostable, biodegradable or not. Here we have to tidy things up a bit, because in the official definition of bioplastics, which the law refers to, here you can see it's a plastic that derives from biomasses, so it has a renewable source, or is biodegradable or compostable or both, which in my opinion creates a lot of confusion because it pieces together two concepts that are in fact detached. The fact that one object derives from biomasses or is biodegradable are not linked. It's as if I went into a clothes shop and I want to try to trousers and a jacket, and I can then use credit or cash to pay. These are two detached concepts. Well, I tried a metaphor, but I'm not quite sure whether it worked. But the notion is that these are two completely separate things. And here you have this chart. You have traditional plastics from oil, such as PP, PET, or PE. Or those same plastics can be obtained from the biomasses. The building blocks, that is to say the train wagons that are used to make PET, can be obtained from biomasses. And I'll show you an example further on. In this case, in my definition, but also in the official definition, these are bioplastics because they derive from the biomasses, the original source. While here we have plastics that come from oil but are biodegradable, because one might think that something from oil is not biodegradable, but it's not so. The important thing is the final molecule. This molecule is not, the one on the left is not biodegradable or compostable, biodegradable, while the ones on the right, although they come from oil or from biomasses, whether they come from oil or biomasses, are biodegradable, in spite of the fact that some of them derive from or are drawn from oil. Here on the bottom right, these are in theory plastics, but they're not, where we have the biomass produced biodegradable bioplastic. For example, the polylactic acid, the PLA, which in turn it comes from the sugars that I feed the cells, and it's a chemical reaction. Then we have the PHA that are naturally produced by some microorganisms or cellulose, so that is to say, we can be using it, or mater B, which is, or bi, which is mostly what our carrier bags are made of. So one of the things that the law says that the carrier bag must be 40% of renewable source, which means that 40% must come from biomasses. The other 60% may be either oil or biomass. But this doesn't mean that they're only 40% biodegradable, but it means that they can be 100% biodegradable. I make an object which is made 40% from this, 50% made from this other thing, but in any case, it is partly biodegradable or all biodegradable. It depends on what I make it. This is the background that creates a lot of confusion because people confuse it, biodegradable or recyclable or whatever. All these plastics are recyclable. But this means that I take a plastic bottle, I melt it and I reduce it and I obtain another plastic object. But as you go on, the quality is lower. So from a plastic bottle, which is the food grade object, which is the highest grade, I can't have another object which is for food, but I could have a fleece jacket. Or then maybe if I have to reduce the fleece one, I can make a plastic bench. And then there's another concept, which is that of being biocompostable, which is different from biodegradable, although they go together. In fact, biocompostable means that I can throw it in the compostables bin, the bins, but it goes in a compostable bin and then it goes into a compostable machine with a certain pH, a certain heat, which then degrades it. There are three phases. The first phase is a phase of the chemical physical characteristics. Then it has more the plastic characteristics, and then we go to another phase when the little building blocks are separated, and then there's a last phase, which is assimilation, where the various parts are then literally eaten by the microorganism. So in fact they disappear, and the microorganism duplicates and so on. If it's biodegradable, it's more complicated, because initially it means that if I leave it in the park, after a certain amount of time it will disappear, but this period of time is much shorter than the one that traditional plastics have, the non-degradable one. So, for example, the PET might take up to 1,000 years to degrade, while if you have a biodegradable one, it depends on the material, but in normal environment it may take between months and years. It can also make 20 years, but it's still better than the 600 to 1,000. But it also means that we shouldn't forget them in the forest, in the woodland, or in the park, because it has an impact. So we have to bring them home and throw them in the appropriate bin. This is the PET. There are several companies, such as Coca-Cola and Ford, the big ones, that are developing the plant bottle, which is PET, but it's a bio-PET because it's two different building blocks, and one of the two is made from plants. So 30% is renewable, because what counts is what the final molecule is made of, except for an exception which we might talk about. The objective is also involving the other 70%, to have an object which is 100% from biomasses. As far as the PHBs are concerned, this is produced by a certain number of microorganisms that use it as a deposit. For us, it's plastic. But bacteria are not interested in plastic bottles, but they use it as a storage place when there's a lot of carbon and not enough nitrogen. When there is this unbalance, they put it aside. They put the carbon and the nitrogen aside. In the normal situation, then they go back to eating it, which is what plants do with starches and what we do with fats. So they produce it naturally. Or we have PLA, polylactic acid, which are produced by a number of microorganisms to generate this very long polymer, a long train. What is this here? Well, in this case, in the case of polylactic acid, we have both the notions, and that are separate. That is to say, it is the result of a renewable source, a biomass, that grows thanks to the sunlight, lactic acid, polylactic acid, and plastic. And once the finished product is no longer used, it's no longer necessary, it can be biodegraded. If I forget it somewhere, or better still, if I compost it, what does it release? Water and CO2, in some case natural gas, which also has to be considered. And the CO2 can be taken by plants to produce its biomass. I have a cycle which is virtually complete, circular bioeconomy. But these two elements are separate, while people tend to confuse them. In fact, I think that the initial definition contributes to the confusion between biocompostable and biodegradable. A major confusion and between the biomasses and the biodegradable product. Consumers must understand what they have to do, because otherwise they might make confusion. In the case of PLA, it cannot be distinguished from the PET. If you touch it, you can't tell it apart. I was telling you earlier on of an evening, I was telling them, in fact, that I'd gone to Milan and beer was served of a PLA, and I was the only one, I think, who realized it. Yes, there is proof, because it was only my glass, because when I went to throw it away, there was plastic and organic. The plastic was full of those glasses, and the other one was empty. Well, it means that the Milanese tend to not throw things on the floor, but they didn't know that that was in fact a compostable one, because if you do to know it, you have to read it, because you can't really tell them.
Quello che dice la legge
Well, at this point, I would like to refer to the law. And I would like to ask Stefano Bertacchi, who's our expert, if he could interpret it. In fact, I would like to ask him if it's a well-written law or not. In fact, of this law, I would like to say that it regulates plastic ultralight bags, and by ultralight, they mean the ones that are whose thickness is below 15 thousandths of a milliliter, 15 microns. So these bags in ultralight and light material must be biodegradable and compostable. That's what the law says. That is to say, developed or produced with materials that are compostable, and that's fine. Consistently with what the Uni-N 13432/2002. This means that European Directive 720 of the European Union is implemented. But they also say the most important novelty does not only have to do with the shoppers, that's what they called, and the European standards. No, they're not worried about that. But they're more concerned the fact that any retail or department store or warehouses people have to pay for their bags. This has nothing to do with the European Union. They cannot be given, but they have to be sold to the customer, and their price must be identified clearly in the bill or in the invoice. For instance, it must said 2 plastic carriers or shoppers. This is certainly not painless for the shopkeeper who fails to do it, because you don't go to prison, but there is a fine which goes from 2,500 to 25,000 euros. So if I went to the chemist, the pharmacy, and if they hadn't given me a separate bill for the bag, it's a fee. They would have had this fine. And I don't want to now go into the legalities of it. They might have to pay 25,000 euros. At this point, my question is, first of all, are these bags really worth their 2 cents? And the second thing is, why are we doing this, that they have to be paid for separately, so on and so forth, when probably we were paying for it before, but we didn't realize, because if you buy 30 euros of drugs, you don't realize if there are an extra 2 cents. And this is probably also true when I go and buy oranges and fennel and celery. Why did we interpret the European directive in this rather odd way that's made it very complicated instead of simplifying it? This is a very interesting question which underlies the big discussion that there has been. As far as this information is concerned, I prepared a leaflet that was handed out in some supermarkets, and which explains these things. that I'm not going to read them, to help you understand that this information can be found or should be found very easily. So, in fact, some supermarkets did it. I think it should have been done probably a long time ago before introducing them, because now it was been a bit of a mess. So surely it's a very important topic. There have been mistakes. As you were saying quite rightly, we were already paying for the bags. What I don't understand why we have to have it made clear now with a separate receipt, because people will associate it now to this extra cost. It's only a few cents. Yeah, but at the end of the year, if you count it, it'll be €2 a year. I don't think so. That's what they say. I think it'll be 10 to 15 euros a year. Yes, it's certainly less than for the 1,000 euro increase. I think it'll be a little less. It'll be about 900 euros a year more for electricity. So this law could have been written a bit better. Well, I think it should have been said clearly before, because in many cases they were already, for example, in not only the shoppers we had to pay, you couldn't use traditional plastics, but all right, you were able to use your whatever stock you had, so you must finish them, and then so many supermarkets now are using compostable and biodegradable. Now we're also talking about the bags for fruit and vegetables. A lot of people were saying, well, yes, by understanding that you're paying for it, you will not be wasting them. Well, it's not true. I would have asked people to pay for it even before, because in spite of a greater awareness of consumers in Italy, unless people pay for it or their health is at risk, people don't understand. And so that's all right, because within the notion of sustainability, there is environmental sustainability, but also economic and social sustainability, which are very often not considered. And this is very important. For example, whether we're using corn or maize as a source or oil. So I would have said that we should have now get the people to pay for the old bags, and then they would have just switched type of bags. So it's not that people will be using fewer bags because of this. Yes. If you buy fruit, you have to purchase it in a bag. But because to avoid waste of an additional bag, not so much. There are some things like melons that you don't need a bag for. And those are cases where you want the consumers to become more environmentally aware and, for example, not use packaging. In fact, as a result, a lot of people will increase the amount of processed food. This was exaggerated. Everything happened because a lot of people drew their attention to the fact that people focused it, maybe also to distract them from the major increase in energy prices. But can I have an idea of what the real cost of this bag is? I paid 2 cents for it. I don't know the exact production cost. On a whole, for example, talking about PLA, it costs twice compared to traditional plastic. So if we're talking about 2 or 3 euros a kilo, here it's about twice as much. Yes. So bioplastic is twice as much. Why? Well, because bioplastic, this might cost 6 euros a kilo, probably a little less, 5 euros a kilo. But we don't know how much it weighs. That's That's probably €6 is probably what it costs, but you'd have to work out production costs and so on. I brought several bags from several supermarkets. Let's have a look at them. Because when you pay, you take the bigger bags, which are regularly costing 10 cents. They have been. I sent my father out to all around all the supermarkets. In this case, this is Lidl. Yes, you also have the glove, because you don't understand what the glove is made of, and it doesn't say anything, and I don't know. In fact, you should know, you have to throw those gloves away. I'm not taking it home. So let me see. Here it says that it is Mater B and it's fruit and vegetable, biodegradable, compostable. 40% renewable material, and Mater B is a patent. Here you can see it, 40% is made up of sweet corn and 60% which is non-renewable source, so I expect it comes from oil, but I can't tell. But it's certainly biodegradable, otherwise we couldn't throw it in the compostable. So in this case it tells you that it's Mater B. It also has a barcode. Well, here I have other examples. This is Auchan, which says made in Vietnam, so it doesn't say. We don't know whether it's Mater B or not, but it's certainly biodegradable. Novamont is Cata Bastioli's firm. She also was responsible for the patent, but part of the material with which those shoppers is made, that is covered by industrial secret, so we don't know what it's made of. I wanted to try the Esselunga supermarket one, because here it is. Because it's also labeling. As some people say, is the label biodegradable? My answer, I don't know, it depends what it's made of. But for example, Esselunga says here, bag, and also the label can be thrown in the disposable, in the compostable. You must look at it to understand what it's made of. And now I'm going to ask a question which he may or may not answer because it's not his field. Is it true that the receipts, and there are lots because every time you have something, is it true that they're thermal paper, so it must not be mixed with normal paper? And is it true that the ink that is used for the receipts can also be dangerous from the point of view of our health? Yes, the additional receipt is something new, because when I've shopped it was part of this. And it's more meaningful, because if we're talking about sustainability and then we have an extra receipt, that's a bit crazy. But in any case, yes, it's longer. Yes, there's a lot of advertising on the receipts too. But yes, what we're saying about not throwing receipts in the paper bin is true. Clearly it depends, but on the whole, thermal paper is not to be thrown in the paper bin, but it also depends on the local decisions. For instance, the Tetra Pak in Milan, you throw it in paper, but in Bergamo it goes in plastic. So we had enormous advertising billboards. We were taught that Tetra Pak, this was a very effective advertising campaign, because now we all know that the Tetra Pak Now, what is the Tetra Pak? It has to have Tetra Pak, but there are other packaging. There's other packaging that looks like Tetra Pak and is not Tetra Pak. Well, I don't know, but once again, you'd have to go and check. Tetra Pak is, of course, a registered trademark. Here, I'll show you another slide. Here are the various symbols that are used, the Japanese one and all the others, to indicate that this is compostable, biodegradable, that you can, well, whatever. Complicated. You would need a special course for citizens, for residents. I would like to stop things here to go back to Professor Fracastoro to ask him about something on what is called the basic energy contract. In December 2017, a law was approved that abolishes progressively, as from 2019, those basic contracts that we used, energy contracts, to show the difference between one year and the other. That is to say, in Italian are called contratto di maggior tutela, and they're basic consumer defense contract. What does this mean in practice? Well, it meant that a user who did not wish to refer to the free market must have the possibility of having a supplier. And there is this basic contract where the authority, the energy authority, determines the cost of energy, and what the user has to pay is certainly something which has to be competitive with the free market. I'd like to ask you, who decides all this in Italy? The authority. What is this authority? It is called the Authority for the Regulation of Electricity and Gas. It has this symbol, ARERA. It is an independent authority that defends the rights of the citizens. It's not something which is public. It is certainly public but not government. It's independent. It's an independent authority, a bit like a watchdog. It started in the Anglo-Saxon world, or even, I would say, the Swedish ombudsman, the representative of the person, somebody who is going to look after your interests, and who do not try to sell a product, do not try to talk about one or the other one, somebody you can trust. I must say that I think that in spite of the fact that we're not in the Anglo-Saxon world, our authorities, and then newspapers will tell me maybe it's not true, but they are certainly not colluding with any of the big multinationals or anything like that. It's important to have this type of authority at the moment in which you have the liberalization process underway, otherwise it's chaos. The fact that, to go back to what I was saying, if you go back to the basic contract, who don't want to be part, yes, I'm one of them, who don't want to be part of the struggle between one and another, clearly creates doubts. It's not so obvious, but these users, these people, will have now the possibility of to develop a new contract, which is not exactly the same or the best contract. Now this only exists for companies. A company has to be able to have energy to supply its production and can't remain without a supplier. So for these companies, there is a safeguard, but because there is a risk factor within it, it's slightly more expensive than the other. And now, for private users too, they will, if they don't wish to enter the free market, they too will opt for a contract that defend them, but which does not directly managed by the authority or determined by the authority, but by territorial agencies that indirectly is managed by the authority. But there is certainly a longer chain of command. Yes, but I have another question. Do I automatically go, or do I have to express a will to do this? Do I have to actually say it? Automatically. So I don't have to do anything. Then I know that there will be, and if you want to, you can see the details. There will be a transient period when there will be some bills that have, say, placet at the end, which means I agree in Latin, and which will switch you from one system to the other, where the user can decide what they do, or whether they wish to switch to the free market.
No, direi abbiamo fatto una certa ora, insomma. Sì. Non so se
I think that at this point it is quite late. I don't know if Piero has any more questions, or if not, we can... Yes, I'd like to have a game for the audience. I have two bottles here. One is PET, the traditional one, and one is PLA, polylactic acid. And the challenge is guess which is which. You've got to guess which is which.
Una è verde.
Mentre loro saggiano, posso dire ancora io una cosa sulla famosa faccenda delle buste di plastica? La cosa che a me...
I want to say something about the carrier bags, the shoppers. Something which really bothers me is that, to an extent, the large supermarkets saved on people, because if there had been someone at the fruit and vegetable store, they could have in fact used a paper bag, and then you can't use it, and so now it's completely banned as if it were a gun. So now you do things, so you put your glove, you pick them up, you weigh things, you did things that someone else was doing it, and then in this way was earning a living, and then you also have to pay for the bag. Do you see what I mean? The consumers have to carry out the work. I find this particularly strong against the users and the consumers and society. It's really punitive. Two bottles. We have different opinions. I think that the PLA is green, and he says the opposite. Is that the solution? Well, that's what we think. Well, one of the two has guessed, that's for sure. Is there a roaming mic to hear what some people are going to say? Let's see. And then we'll have questions. No one wants to touch plastic now. Plastic, bioplastic, they can be colored in any color. In fact, that green might be misleading, but no. The PLA, I could have it black, I could have it lilac, I could have it anything. Please don't steal them, because he has to use them again. Let's hear. Please, let's hear the questions. They can't be told from each other. That's a problem. Because paradoxically, the paradox, and one of the main criticism of the compostable bags, they break. But these are the same. Here, which I have the bottles. There's no difference. I don't have the knowledge. I was saying that they're the same. Maybe it's true. As far as what you were saying on the bags at the supermarkets, the shoppers, to see what it contains, a supermarket has adopted this system. They have a paper bag, but with a transparent strip, so then they don't pay. But well, what about the strip? Where do I throw it? Do I throw it in paper or plastic? Yes, it's got both. Then you'd have to rip the plastic away and then throw it, so it becomes even more complicated. It's not yet a solution, I don't think. I think that mainly people are saying that they're indistinguishable. Let's hear the verdict. Noise. They make a different noise. That may also depend on how thick they are. So according to the material and whether it's thick or not, it can be deformed or more or less easily and make the same noise. Right. Tell us. In fact, the answer is that it's written on them. On one it says PT and the other one says PLA. The problem is that they're written, you must go and look for them, because it's a little circle at the bottom of the bottle and one says one thing. But the green one originally was this, where it says bio bottle, biodegradable. It's written on the label. It's the green one. Is it also written on the plastic? Well, not on the label. Well, it says PLA. The problem is, how the hell can people know that PLA is a polylactic acid and that it's biodegradable? People don't. So you have to go to the tip with a couple of hours with you, because clearly you have to explain to the consumer very clearly what they have to do, because otherwise they will rightly throw it in plastic and make a confusion for the tips. So the two objects are comparable because it's the consumers want something that they know, but the PLA in terms of performance is the same as PET. So it's really too good to be distinguished. And then biodegradable plastic, in recyclable plastic, it causes damages, doesn't it? Yes, if you put biodegradable in plastic. What about these two little vases? Same thing, because we often have these. Yes, this is PP, polypropylene. So it's not biodegradable. This is PLA. And you can see this one is softer. Why? But simply because it's thicker. Two questions. If one on the energy and one on shoppers, let us see.
C'è una signora che ha una domanda, vediamo subito.
Mi è stato più volte detto che I contenitori dell'acqua.
Very often I've been told that the water containers, the blue ones, are very dangerous. Here there's an expert. I would be very pleased to know why. The water containers, you mean bottles? Yes, bottles. White and blue. Well, as I was saying, any material of the ones I was showing you, of the plastics, can be colored in any way. The fact that they're red or blue or pink or whatever, it doesn't make any difference. Unless it's the dye, that would be different. Certainly, there is no major alarm because the bottles are safe. they may, in the long term, release substances that are not particularly good for you, but we're talking about very long times. And it's also one of the problems when you dispose of them in the environment, they release dangerous substances, partly. In terms of the sunlight, are there any materials that are more delicate that will degrade more easily in the sunlight? So it's best to buy water bottles in certain materials. Very often these water bottles are left in the light and sun for a long time. It depends what's in there. Clearly, if you have a fizzy water or fizzy drink, a soft drink can degrade the plastic which is in. So first aluminium is used. That's why aluminium is often used, because it depends. There's a lot of depends here. It depends on the material, depends what the conditions are. Certainly light, but heat more than that can have an effect. And this also depends on the color. So some colors absorb more. A dark bottle will absorb more color, more heat, So if we compare it to glass, oil, if you want to store it and avoid it becoming acid, has to be a dark bottle. Why? Because the sunlight tends to degrade or destroy the molecules, the acids and the fatty acids, so the quality of the oil. So a good quality oil has to be in a dark bottle. So going back to the question, we should not be concerned by the blue bottle per se. The color per se doesn't mean anything. Very often you hear these alarms, but in most cases they're groundless. If there were a health problem, it would already have emerged, because it's something that we use every day. Last question, over there.
Volevo collegarmi un attimo a quello che diceva il...
I'd like to talk a second about my colleague was saying, because I too, many moons ago, I was working in that field, referred to the difficulty of telling the one materials from the other. We give citizens a task which normal citizens are not able to carry out. We were talking about thermal paper. Well, you could talk about 101 other examples. Personally, I was a chemical engineer, so I could tell plastics, but unfortunately Italy is not made up only of chemical industry. Well, it's unfortunately, because otherwise it would be okay. I would like to try and understand how a person of whatever age to carry out, to actually throw the rubbish away in a proper way. In Turin, but I also think that we should not forget that by separating the various items of the rubbish is quite expensive. There's a whole system, so much so that currently it costs a lot of money and in my opinion is useless or has a very limited use. Certainly glass separated from cardboard, but all the rest of it I wouldn't. Very often, personally, I find it very difficult to tell the demingled from the compostable. Do you think that that rubbish collection could not be more effective, for instance, doing it once it's been collected, instead of forcing citizens to become completely stupid to understand where they got to throw the rubbish away? Well, or even we could do it upstream, for example, laws whereby if you produce packaging, you can only produce packaging in a certain way so that the consumer doesn't have to carry it out. Yes, this is true, but at the same time, you'll also go and have to read the label. I would like to avoid reading the label. I have 3 points. First of all, what was being said, that is to say, there has to be intelligent packaging. You have to be separated. It's not a mix of paper and plastic, but that the consumer knows that that has to be thrown there and that has to be thrown there. Right, so they can be separated. Then there's the problem of what consumers have to do. Partly it is important to increase awareness, environmental awareness, because in any case, by doing this, people are educated, because unless we do our little bit, we won't learn. And a step at a time, because we have to become more and more aware of the environmental problems, but also these small things. And then to do it downstream is very complicated, because it depends where. In the small centers you can do it. Milan, it would be impossible. But I see that the AMSA, that is the company that is the rubbish company in Milan, that gives out information, and then there's an app by the European community that's called Juncker, as not like Mr. Juncker. Oh, well, I don't know if it's by chance. In any case, it's Juncker. Which is free and reads the barcode. I have this product. I go on it, and it tells me, it can geolocalize me. I say, I'm in Milan, tell me where I'm going to throw it, because it's very intelligent, because it shows you the photo of the product, if it's in their bank, and most of them are, and if not, you can add it. And it tells you where to throw the various parts are. So if there are the various components, it says, this has to be thrown in paper, this has to be thrown in plastic, this and so on. Clearly, we're talking about for the generation with smartphones. Maybe older people find it a little bit more complicated, but it's a step forward, because it's an object that most people are holding, a smartphone. I discovered it because it was a stand next to mine in a fair in Milan. When I saw it, I said, very beautiful, this Juncker. And probably I would never have known about it, but this might be something to speed up and facilitate. So the message is, let's download Juncker. Oh, no, Juncker. Thank you very much, and thank you. Goodbye.